if someone is losing their deen or is being tried because of their deen and they're losing their deen, then it's a matter of agreement that they must emigrate.
In modern era, for Muslims, the place where the most number of Muslims live is not always the safest place for Muslims to practice Islam.
We eat something called food, fava beans. Do my kids need to like that? Probably not. Many things that are spiritually neutral, do the kids need to observe those practices? Not necessarily. You know, women in Bangladesh and Egypt don't dress the same way, but they're hijabi. They're trying to fulfill all those conditions, but they end up dressing differently. That's fine. You know, culture here can be accommodated. There is no problem here.
Is it halal to, let's say, monetize your YouTube channel?
And the concept of Umul Badwa is that when something is very widespread, we will have to basically make some concessions.
So, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Dr. Hatem Al Haj. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Walaikum salam.
So I have seen your videos so many times and benefited a lot from your knowledge. So just a quick introduction of Sheikh Dr. Hatem Al Haj is that he is a board certified pediatrician, studied in USA. He's originally from Egypt. He later on studied in depth, did masters in Islamic psychology and did PhD in comparative fiqh. And he's a very well renowned Islamic scholar in the West. Not many people know him in Bangladesh, but I hope to introduce him the best of my ability because I have personally benefited a lot from his knowledge. He's uniquely qualified because it's very rare to find an Islamic scholar who is also a medical professional, is also a pediatrician. So he, from his experience and from his multidisciplinary approach, he brings a lot of very important perspective on the table. So we plan to talk about some crucial points today, including migration, career, identity, culture, and all of that. So again, Sheikh, deeply grateful that you could make time for this podcast.
It's my pleasure and honor to be with you, Afi.
So Sheikh, just to start off, is the first discussion that I would like to have with you is regarding the modern understanding of migration. There's a lot of discussion in the East and the West. So we are also three brothers. My other two brothers are based in Australia. We all started our journey in Bangladesh. I'm in Bangladesh. I traveled a little bit to the West, to the East. So there's a lot of discussion among Muslim parents, Muslim youth about, is it okay to settle down in the West for career, or is it safe spiritually? Is it halal or is it haram? And there's a good number of people in Bangladesh who are moving and settling down to West because of a safer life, less corruption. At the same time, there is a good number of Muslim scholars in Bangladesh, local scholars, who are coming out to the point that it is haram to settle down in the West because of the uncertain spiritual identity of the new generation. If you kindly put your insights on this point.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Well, I think this is a matter that requires some knowledge, basically religious knowledge, but also contextual knowledge. The religious knowledge is where you know the text of Revelation, the verses and the prophetic traditions on this issue, and the interpretations of the scholars, and certainly at the center of our legal heritage would be the position of the four madhahib on the issue, and other mujtahideen from outside the four madhahib that have the sort of the degree of ijtihad. Keep in mind that they did not talk about emigrating from Muslim lands to non-Muslim lands. They talked about whether it is binding on someone in non-Muslim lands, a Muslim in non-Muslim lands, to emigrate to Muslim lands. So that's the framing of their discussion, because during their time there weren't that many Muslims emigrating from Muslim lands to non-Muslim lands to need to address this issue. They addressed the opposite. If you have, for Muslims living in non-Muslim lands, is it binding on them to emigrate to Muslim lands? So that's how they framed the discussion, which is important. First, you could say that all of them would agree that if someone is losing their deen or is being tried because of their deen and they're losing their deen, then it's a matter of agreement that they must emigrate. Then if someone is not losing their deen, but certainly there is some risk that cannot be denied to their spiritual status and to their religious commitment, then you have on two sides, you have the Malikis who consider it obligatory, and that's the majority of the Malikis and the authorized view in their madhab, who consider it obligatory to emigrate. And the Zahiris also, Imam Ibn Hazm would be in that camp. You have on the opposite side the Hanafis who consider that not binding to emigrate, because immigration was only wajib or binding before the conquest of Mecca. And you have the Shafi'is and Hanbalis in the middle who say, if you're able to practice your religion freely, then it's not binding on you to emigrate. However, it seems that all of them would consider it at least preferable to emigrate for various reasons they mention. What they would be expected. Those reasons would be anyway expected. If you're talking about living in the midst of Muslims, hearing the adhan 5 times a day, going to Muslim court for adjudication of, conflicts, etc. All of these things would make it basically a no-brainer that it would be preferable to emigrate. Now, all of this, we're talking, all of this discussion is basically based on the Muslim countries being truly Islamic. And, and certainly we do consider the Muslim countries Muslim. However, there are many things, many practices that are not particularly Islamic at different levels. So right. that does have some impact on the discussion because when it's just that the contrast is like, let's say, this is basically the Muslim country during the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz or Umar ibn al-Khattab, even better. And contrast it with living in Rome, for instance, during that time. You see, the contrast is a huge contrast. But now you compare, living in Australia versus living in Bangladesh. Certainly, the majority of people in Bangladesh are Muslims. That's not true in Australia. Certainly, you hear the adhan in the streets in Bangladesh. That's not true in Australia. And there are many other things also. And the likelihood of your kids growing up Muslim may be higher in Bangladesh than in Australia. So these are all things that cannot be denied. But again, the difference is not as huge as the difference between Rome during the time of Umar ibn Khattab and Medina.
So, Sheikh, if we look at the what happened in last 40 years is particularly in the West, through all the social movements that has happened, it has become gradually harder for Muslim youth to keep their Islamic identity. At the same time, the concerns of the parents, especially those who are second generation Muslim, what happened is their parents, it's easier for them to think about moving back to East, but for the kid, they were born and raised in USA, in London, in Canada, so they see their parents are confused after living all their life in America. So sometimes they're, as a citizen and as by their passport and papers, they are from the West, but their parents are always dragging them and trying to keep the Asian or the back home identity as well, because of the fear of spiritual uncertainty. So now we see scholars with two differing opinions. So there are scholars or speakers, maybe the better word is Islamic speakers, not scholars. So there are Islamic speakers who will tell the parents that you should be afraid that your kids will lose faith. So stay connected with back home, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, and all of that. Otherwise, your next generation will be lost. So that's one group of Islamic speakers. Another group of Islamic speakers will be like, you know what, your children are American, your children are from England because they were born here, they studied in these schools, all the 25, 30, 35 years they were here. So it doesn't make sense that you tell them to go back to a country because they don't have any other country. The only identity that they have is the Western identity. So even if if you can throw some insights, because as a psychologist who regularly sees clients from overseas, Bangladeshi clients, I can clearly see this dilemma, because even if you don't look at from a fiqh perspective, if you look at from a purely reality context based, there is a struggle and a crisis and a struggle of identity. So if you kindly share your insights.
So the question is like whether the parents can take them back to their home countries, or is it a question about customs and traditions and things of that nature that their parents want them to preserve in the West while they're living in the West? I can answer both questions, I guess. So when it comes to the customs and traditions, when it comes to, Muslim customs in general, whether it's Bangladesh, Pakistan, Morocco, Yemen, etc. Many times we say that culture and Islam are two different things, and the kids need to preserve their Islam. They do not have to preserve their culture. I would say that this is not necessarily wrong, but it depends on what you mean by culture also. Like, if I'm used to eating, like I'm from Egypt, and we eat something called, food, fava beans.
Yeah.
Do my kids need to like that? Probably not. And many things that are completely sort of spiritually neutral, they're just basically habits, natural, what we call jibilli habits, that are spiritually neutral, morally neutral. Do the kids need to basically observe those practices and preferences? No, not necessarily. But many times, the sort of Muslim culture is basically formed or informed by Islam. So the way we treat our parents, for instance, the way we stand in front of our parents, the way we, our body language, etc. These are things that have been informed by Islam. Lower your wing of humility, for instance, to your parents. This is not culture. This is not it's not Bangladesh or Pakistan or Egypt. This is Islam. So, and although it may manifest in different ways in different cultures and with different Muslim cultures and among different Muslim ethnicities, but it has been informed by Islam. It's manifesting in different ways, but it was informed by Islam. So we have to be careful when we say that don't worry about culture. We have to be careful that we are not throwing out Islam also with the culture. And that requires some knowledge and requires also some open-mindedness on the part of the parents and some selflessness on the part of the parents. So your kid does not need to be a Xerox copy of you. It may make you feel more comfortable if your kid was a copy of you, but that's unfair also to your child who grew up in different circumstances and different environment. So just make sure that you're not overburdening them with a baggage that's too heavy to carry and also unwarranted to carry. And try to figure out with precision and knowledge, what is it that should be preserved? What is it that was basically that is Islam or informed by Islam? As for going back, the discussion that we just had would apply. Are we able to practice our deen? Are we at risk of losing it? How grave is that risk? These are all things that should be considered. And whether you're second generation, third generation, fourth generation, whether your grandfather was Columbus himself, and you converted to Islam, you are now a Muslim. And a Muslim would basically emigrate if his deen is in danger. A Muslim would always privilege his deen over anything else, sacrifice anything else to preserve his deen and to live by his deen. So this applies even if you were in Bangladesh and you were basically suffering because of your deen, then you have to emigrate. So we have to teach our kids all the time that you should never make your deen second to anything.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it's not always fair. So that someone, let's say a preacher will preach based in Australia to an Australian Muslim population, because there is a challenge of deen to talk directly about migration rather than trying to face the challenge, because wherever they migrate, they will face challenges.
What you need to drill into them, to instill into them, and drill into them is your deen should be always first. You should sacrifice for your deen. You should never sacrifice your deen. And whenever you feel that your deen is at risk, then you must emigrate to a safe place where you could practice your deen.
And that safe place doesn't always mean a place where Muslims are the majority. It can simply be a place where it's safe to practice faith. Do you agree with the point that in modern era, for Muslims, the place where the most number of Muslims live is not always the safest place for Muslims to practice Islam?
Well, yeah, sometimes that's true also. Sometimes the people have emigrated from Muslim countries because of persecution. They have emigrated to Europe and America because of persecution. That's true for many people, yes.
Yeah. So, Sheikh, if we talk a little bit about culture, because there are growing tension when I see in Bangladesh particularly. So what happens is in Bangladesh, there's historically India, Pakistan, Bangladesh was a blend of Hindus and Muslims. And then the British were here for 200 years and then they left. But there is always that Islam religion, Hindu religion and culture, a blend of all of that. And the cultural identity is a huge blend. So what happens is, particularly in last 50 years, what we have seen is, so there's this conflict between the cultural identity and the Islamic identity among Bangladeshi Muslims and Bangladeshi population. So can you throw a bit of light about how Islam sees culture?
Well, Islam, the Islamic teachings are flexible enough and diverse enough to accommodate for different cultures, as long as those cultures are not offensive to Islamic values. So the way you dress, for instance, take for example, the way a woman dresses. What is it that is required of a woman? Basically, to cover the whole body except for the face and hands. And certainly people, there's controversy over this, but if you go by, the majority, although that also is contestable, but if you go by what I think is the majority, that a woman should cover the entire body except for the face and hands. Now, that's what Islam requires. Islam requires her to cover her entire body except for the face and hands, with a dress that does not show the contours of the body, does not show the complexion of the body. It is not in and of itself a source of attraction or basically something that she acquired from people of lower moral character or something, like a dress that is known to be the dress of people of bad reputation or something of that nature. So these are certain requirements, these are certain conditions that need to be fulfilled, but it does not describe what kind of dress. Any sort of attire that would fulfill those conditions would be suitable. So culture has a place here. It's obvious that women in Bangladesh and Egypt don't dress the same way. But they're hijabi. They're trying to fulfill all those conditions, but they end up dressing differently. That's fine. That's, culture here can be accommodated. There is no problem here. The foods that people eat, body language sometimes, certain things of that nature. These things are dictated by culture. Also, culture is considered in religious rulings because this is how we understand people's speech. And anything that is not determined by Shara will be, we will defer to culture. We will defer to the customs of people, ongoing customs of people, when it, for anything that is not determined by Ash-Shara. One of the legal maxims in fiqh, one of the 5 major comprehensive legal maxims, these are called al-Qawa'id al-Kulliyya al-Fiqhiyya al-Kubra, or al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya al-Kulliyya al-Kubra. One of them is al-'Ada Muhakkama, which means customs are given consideration. So Islam does accommodate the cultures as long as they are not in conflict with Islamic values and Islamic teachings. Because if there is a conflict, Islam does not accept any competition because it is from God. I mean, and God, people should conform to God. God does not conform to societal, trends or personal desires.
Islamic speakers in Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and all of that. So what is the boundary and what is the balance?
Okay, so basically, it requires a little bit of effort on the part of the listener and the speaker. So the speaker, it is the duty of the speaker to recognize their limitations. It's the duty of the listener also to not take new knowledge, new rules, new concepts from people who lack the credibility and the authority, basically to be teaching them new things. But they can, for like a regular mu'adha, anyone can give a mu'adha, particularly if it is supported by an ayah or a hadith. If you read a verse from the Quran and you basically tell me, the scholar said such and such about this verse, reflect on it, see where you are from this verse, see if you're truly living up to the teachings of this verse or a hadith. If you bring some book like Riyadh al-Salihin, for instance, and read a hadith from it, and read the commentary of some of the scholars, or just translate it. You read the hadith, translate it, bring up 1 or 2 benefits that are not controversial, things that are known, Islamically.
Sheikh, one of the confusion there is is it halal to, let's say, monetize your YouTube channel or Facebook? In Facebook, there's no you cannot skip it. They will push the ad. So in YouTube, there is you can stop monetization from Google ads. So what's the fatwa regarding that? Again, there are difference of opinion that I have seen among Bangladeshi speakers. Some of them would say it's haram because you are responsible for the ads because you give the permission. Another group of speakers will be like, no, because it's like I lended my apartment to someone else. So what would be your insight?
If monetization of these channels would allow goodness to spread, and would allow people to dedicate more time to education, then it's fine to monetize them. I don't monetize mine. But people have different circumstances, and if monetization will enable certain people to dedicate more time for the benefit of others. There are, for instance, certain channels, out of Egypt, certain people that teach Nahwu, for instance, or Arabic grammar, and they do a very good job in teaching. Had they not monetized their channels, they would have not been able to produce all this content. And it is good content and it's beneficial content. So it's not basically like an egotistic pursuit of, or like a desire for fame or celebrity. But some people produce good content, and it does take them effort and time to produce it. and to dedicate more time and effort to producing this very good content that's beneficial, I think monetization would be okay.
So, one of the confusion that arises is if I cannot monetize. So, let's say I'm a teacher, I'm teaching, let's say, physics, and if I monetize it, that is the only way I can get some money so that I can sustain the channel, and people are learning physics from it. But at the same time, I'm praying 5 times a day, and then someone comes to me and says that, oh, when I was listening to your lecture, our ad came with where the ad had maybe music, ad had a bit of something that is not pure and halal. So you were responsible because you showed me that. So, like, is it really the teacher's responsibility because the audience could have skipped the ad, or is it like, what's a easy way to understand it?
It is it's gray. It's it's a little dubious. It's gray. That's why if someone prefers not to monetize, then that would be preferable. However, the listener, the viewer, can skip the ad. And if he has the power to skip the ad, then he has the power to skip the ad. In addition to this, there is something called the umum al-balwa, which is generality of affliction or widespread affliction, widespread difficulty. However you translate it, umum al-balwa. And the concept of umum al-balwa is that when something is very widespread, then we will have to address it with, we will have to basically make some concessions to spare people from hardship when something is very widespread. So those ads are, everywhere. Even when you walk out in the street, you see things on bulletin boards and you see the things on billboards, and you see things, you hear things in supermarkets, songs and with music, and sometimes bad content. So I would say that if there is good beneficial content that people want to spread and want to share with others, and they need basically to dedicate some of their time to producing this content, then monetization should be okay for them.
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh, for all your time. And I benefited a lot from this conversation, and I believe that Bangladeshi people will benefit a lot. So thank you, Sheikh, for your time.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Barakallahu feek, Sheikh.